A squid with eyes the size of basketballs, a crab with legs wider than a car, a worm colony stretching across the seafloor like a living city. These animals are real. They live miles below us right now. The deep ocean takes creatures you know and stretches them into something that should be impossible. We'll meet giants that live for centuries, predators that vanish entire fish in one swallow, and creatures longer than a blue whale. If you enjoy the ride, subscribe and come along. Let's go. Picture a tide pool. Crabs the size of your fist, fish the length of your finger, sea snails you could hold in your palm. Everything near the surface feels small, manageable, and familiar. That is exactly what the shallow ocean is designed to produce. The closer an animal lives to the surface, the smaller it tends to stay. Scientists have known this pattern for over a century. What took much longer to understand was why. Near the surface, food is everywhere. Sunlight hits the water, plants grow, and tiny creatures feed on those plants by the billion. Small bodies work perfectly in this system. They burn energy fast, they reproduce quickly, and predators pick them off before they ever get the chance to grow large. Life moves at a sprint up here. Everything is urgent and short. But something strange starts to happen as you go deeper. The rules change, and they change in a way that bends biology into shapes that seem impossible. Drop below 600 feet and sunlight begins to fade. By 3,000 feet there is no light at all. The temperature falls toward freezing. The pressure builds until it would crush a car into a cube. Food becomes rare. Predators become fewer. And animals, given enough time in these conditions, grow into things that look like they belong in a monster movie. Scientists call this deep sea gigantism. The word sounds technical, but the idea is simple. The deep ocean makes animals big. Absurdly big. The kind of big that makes you wonder how you never heard about it before. A regular pill bug in your backyard is about the size of a pea. Its deep sea cousin, the giant isopod, reaches the size of a football. A common squid in a fish market fits in your hand. Its deep sea relative has eyes the size of basketballs. A standard spider has a body smaller than your thumbnail. The Antarctic sea spider has legs wider than a dinner plate. Same basic animal, completely different size. The only thing that changed was how deep it lives. The story of why this happens is one of the strangest in all of science. It involves pressure, cold, darkness, starvation, and millions of years of quiet evolution in a place we're only now beginning to explore properly. For most of human history, the deep ocean was pure mystery. Sailors came back with stories of massive tentacles wrapping around ships, of sea serpents long as houses, of creatures with eyes that glowed in the dark. Most scientists dismissed these stories as nonsense. They were wrong. Almost every monster in those old sailor legends turned out to be a real animal. The sea serpent is real. The giant tentacled beast is real. The glowing eyes in the dark are real. And the reason all of them exist comes down to a set of forces that the deep ocean applies to every living thing that dares to survive down there. Each force works differently. Together they push bodies toward one outcome, grow larger, live longer, and become something the surface world has never seen. The first and most powerful of those forces is something your body fights against every single day without you noticing. And in the deep ocean, it changes everything. Hold your breath and swim to the bottom of a pool. You will feel it in your ears almost immediately. That squeezing sensation, that building tightness. You're feeling pressure increase as the water above you pushes down. At the bottom of a 12-foot pool, the change is tiny. You barely notice it. Now imagine sinking to the bottom of the Mariana Trench, 7 miles below the surface. The pressure there is over 1,000 times greater than what you feel standing in open air right now. At that depth, the weight of the ocean above presses down with a force equal to stacking 50 jumbo jets on top of your chest. Every square inch of your body would be crushed before you got anywhere near the bottom. So how does anything live down there? The answer comes down to what living tissue is actually made of. Your body is mostly water. Water is nearly impossible to compress. You cannot squeeze it into a smaller space no matter how hard you push. So when the ocean pushes in on a deep-sea creature from every direction at once, the water inside the animal's cells pushes back with equal force. The pressure inside and outside the body balances out. The creature does not get crushed. It is supported. This is where gigantism starts to make sense. On land, the skeleton of a large animal has to hold that animal upright against gravity. An elephant's legs are thick and heavy because they carry tons of weight. The bigger a land animal gets, the stronger its bones must be, and there is a physical limit to how far that can go. Too big, and the bones snap under the weight. In the deep ocean, the water pressure surrounding the animal acts like a full-body brace. It pushes in from every direction equally, which means the creature's own skeleton does not need to carry the full load of its size. Large frames become easier to maintain. Bodies that would collapse on land stay stable in the water. The deep ocean effectively removes the size ceiling that gravity places on life on land. Picture a building held together by the pressure of the air around it, like an inflated balloon. If you release the air, it collapses, but keep the pressure, and the balloon holds its shape no matter how big it grows. Deep-sea creatures live inside that balloon permanently. The ocean is their structure. But there is a catch. This mechanical support only helps if the animal can also find enough food to build and maintain a large body. And in the deep ocean, food is shockingly rare. A creature that needs to eat constantly cannot survive down there. Only animals with an extreme ability to stretch a small meal across weeks, or even months, make it. This is where the next force comes in, and it operates at the level of every single cell inside the body. Cold temperatures in the deep ocean slow an animal's entire engine down so far that it barely burns any fuel at all. In the right conditions, this turns an ordinary lifespan into something almost unreal. The sleeper shark, which lives in the deepest, coldest water on Earth, has been found alive and healthy at an age scientists calculated at over 350 years. That animal was born before the United States existed, and its size, like so many creatures down here, is a direct product of what cold does to a body over centuries. In the summer, insects are everywhere. They hatch, they fly, they breed, and they die, sometimes within a single day. Their lives run fast because the warmth of summer speeds up every chemical process in their bodies. Warm temperatures tell cells to work faster, burn fuel quicker, and age sooner. Cold does the exact opposite. Drop the temperature and every biological process slows down. The heart beats less often. Cells divide more slowly. Waste builds up at a lower rate. The whole body shifts into something close to a long, slow idle. It burns far less energy per hour, and because it burns less energy, it can survive on less food, and because it survives on less food, it can keep living in places where meals are rare and far apart. The deep ocean is cold in a way most people never imagine. Below 3,000 feet, the water hovers just above freezing almost everywhere on Earth. It has been that cold for millions of years. The animals that evolved there adapted to that cold so completely that their entire biology runs at a temperature most surface creatures could not survive. For an animal living in that cold, growing large becomes a different kind of strategy. On the surface, growing large means burning more energy every day. You need more food to maintain a bigger body, and more food means more hunting or more grazing. If food gets scarce, a large body becomes a liability. You starve faster than a small one. In the deep ocean cold, the equation flips. A large body still needs more food in total, but it burns that food so slowly that the gap between meals can stretch for weeks. Scientists have recorded deep-sea creatures sitting motionless on the seafloor for months, barely moving, conserving every calorie. They are not sick or dying. They are thriving. Their biology is designed for exactly this pace. Here is where size becomes a survival advantage instead of a risk. A bigger body holds more stored energy. When a meal finally arrives, a large animal can eat an enormous amount at once, and then coast on those reserves for a long time. A smaller animal with less storage runs out faster and starves. Over millions of years of natural selection in the cold dark, bigger bodies won. They outlasted smaller ones every time food got scarce. The result is that the deep ocean has quietly been running an experiment for millions of years. Animals that grow big, live slow, and wait patiently survive. Animals that stay small, move fast, and need frequent meals do not. And the winners of that experiment are the giants scattered across the seafloor right now. Cold also does something else that matters enormously. It extends growth periods. Most surface animals reach their maximum size within a year or two. Their cells divide quickly, they grow fast, they stop. Cold slows cell division so much that deep sea animals keep growing for decades. An animal that reaches maximum size in 2 years near the surface might keep adding mass for 60 years in the cold deep. More time growing means more time to get bigger. The giant Pacific octopus, found in cold Pacific water, can grow from the size of a pea to the weight of a full-grown man in just 3 years. Scientists believe the cold water version grows faster and larger than the same species in warmer zones. But cold and pressure are only 2 pieces of this story. There is a third force at work in the deep, and it is the one nobody talks about. The strange behaviour of oxygen when it meets near freezing saltwater miles below the surface. Take a warm can of soda and shake it. Open it fast. It explodes. Now take a can straight from the freezer, barely shake it, and open it slowly. The fizz is calm and controlled. The cold kept the gas dissolved inside the liquid instead of rushing out. Water works the same way with oxygen. Cold water holds far more dissolved oxygen than warm water does. This is basic chemistry, and it has enormous consequences for every animal that breathes through gills in the deep ocean. The colder the water, the more oxygen each breath delivers, and more oxygen per breath means muscles can work harder, recover faster, and grow larger than they could in warm, oxygen-thin water. Near the surface in tropical zones, warm water holds relatively little dissolved oxygen. Fish and other gill breathers get a smaller dose per breath. This limits how hard their muscles can work over long periods. It also limits how massive those muscles can become, since bigger muscle fibers need a constant heavy supply of oxygen to stay alive. In the cold deep, the situation reverses. Each breath of water that passes through a creature's gills carries a heavy load of dissolved oxygen. The muscles get fed richly. They can afford to grow dense and large. This is one reason why some of the most powerfully built creatures on Earth live in cold, deep water, with bodies built for crushing, constricting, or dragging prey across the seafloor. The colossal squid, found in the deep cold water around Antarctica, has the largest eyes of any animal on Earth. But its muscles are the real story. Its 8 arms and 2 longer tentacles are packed with dense, oxygen-hungry tissue, and the cold water surrounding it delivers exactly the oxygen supply needed to keep that tissue working. Scientists who have examined colossal squid found that the muscle density in its tentacles rivals anything on land. The oxygen advantage in cold water also explains something counterintuitive. Many people assume deep-sea animals must be weak and sluggish because food is scarce. Some are, but others are built like coiled springs, capable of explosive bursts of speed when a meal finally passes close enough to grab. There is, however, a complication. Oxygen in the deep ocean is not evenly distributed. At certain depths, there is a layer where oxygen levels drop dramatically. Scientists call this the oxygen minimum zone, and it sits at roughly 300 to 3,000 feet in many parts of the ocean. Animals that drift into this zone face a genuine survival crisis. The oxygen minimum zone acts like a barrier in the water column. Some animals are adapted to pass through it quickly. Others cannot cross it at all. This creates isolated populations of creatures in the deep that have been cut off from their surface relatives for millions of years. Separated by that invisible oxygen wall, they evolved in completely different directions. And in the cold, oxygen-rich water below the barrier, they grew. Understanding the oxygen story changes the way you see deep-sea giants. They are powerful because the chemistry of their environment gave them everything they needed to build massive bodies. The ocean fed them from the inside, one breath at a time. But there is one factor that does more to explain gigantism than any single chemistry or physics trick. It is the thing every deep-sea creature has in common, and it shapes every part of how they live, hunt, hide, and grow. The complete and total absence of light. Stand in a dark room. You instinctively slow down. You become more careful. You listen harder. Your whole body shifts into a different mode because one of your main senses has gone offline. Now imagine living your entire life in that darkness, every meal found by touch or faint vibration, every predator sensed before it is ever seen, every decision made without a single photon of light to guide it. That is the permanent reality for every animal below 3,000 feet in the ocean. No light, absolute blackness, forever. And this changes the rules of survival in one very specific way that accelerates gigantism faster than any other single force. Camouflage becomes useless. Near the surface, colour and pattern are life or death. A fish that matches the dappled light of shallow water survives. One that stands out gets eaten. Animals near the surface spend enormous biological energy producing pigment, patterns, and countershading. Their bodies are shaped partly by the need to be invisible to visual predators. Take the light away, and all of that becomes irrelevant. A giant red crab on the ocean floor cannot be seen by anything around it. A pale, white, almost translucent shrimp the size of your forearm is invisible in the dark, whether it is small or enormous. Colour does not matter, pattern does not matter, visual size does not matter. What matters is mass, reach, strength, storage. Once the pressure to stay visually small disappears, body size becomes a pure survival variable. Bigger means you can reach farther when grabbing prey. Bigger means you carry more stored energy. Bigger means you can overpower more of the creatures around you. Bigger means your own predators need to be far more powerful to take you down. And in the deep dark, fewer predators have that power. The result is a slow, relentless push toward large bodies across millions of years. Animals that grew larger left more offspring. Their offspring grew large too. Generation after generation, the average size crept upward, unchecked by the visual constraints that keep surface animals compact. Scientists tracked this pattern across dozens of different animal groups. Isopods, shrimp, jellyfish, squid, sea spiders, sea cucumbers, and many others all show the same trend. The deeper you go, the larger the individuals tend to be compared to their surface relatives. The darkness is not just a backdrop, it is an active force shaping evolution. There is something else the darkness does that is less obvious but just as powerful. It creates extreme hunting pressure on anything that produces light. Some deep-sea creatures glow. They use light to lure prey, find mates, or communicate. But glowing also makes them visible to predators in a world where everything else is pitch black. The arms race between hunters and prey in the dark produced some of the most extreme body shapes in animal history. The anglerfish carries a glowing lure on a stalk above its head. The lure draws curious prey straight toward a mouthful of teeth. The anglerfish's body is shaped entirely around that mouth, massive jaws, a stretching stomach, and almost nothing else. Its body plan is optimized for ambush and darkness in a way that nothing on the surface has ever matched. But the anglerfish is a small player in this story, because the creature that first forced scientists to admit that darkness produces monsters was already famous long before anyone ever pulled one to the surface alive. It had been leaving marks on dead whales for centuries, and in 1873 a piece of one finally landed on a ship's deck. In 1873, a fishing boat off the coast of Newfoundland, Canada, struck something enormous in the water. The crew thought it was wreckage from a ship. They reached down to hook it. Then it moved. A massive tentacle came up over the side of the boat. One of the men grabbed an axe and hacked it off. The piece of tentacle left behind was 19 feet long. The animal it came from had disappeared back into the ocean. Scientists had a tentacle. They had proof. For 200 years before that moment, Sailors across the North Atlantic and the Pacific had returned from voyages with stories about enormous squid attacking ships, wrapping tentacles around masts and dragging sailors into the water. Historians found these stories in journals going back to the 1400s. Norse mythology gave the creature a name, the Kraken. Every serious scientist of the era dismissed the legends as the product of fear, bad weather, and too much time at sea. The tentacle from 1873 changed all of that. A team of researchers examined it and confirmed it belonged to a real species, which they named the giant squid. They estimated from the proportions of that single tentacle that the full animal could reach 60 feet in length, about as long as a semi-truck and trailer combined. Scientists immediately wanted to study a live one. They could not find one. For over a century after that discovery, scientists had only dead or dying specimens washed up on beaches, pulled up in fishing nets, or found in the stomachs of sperm whales. Sperm whales hunt giant squid in the deep, and their stomachs sometimes contained squid beaks and partial arms. From these scraps, researchers pieced together an image of an animal that lived at depths of over 3,000 feet and almost never came anywhere near the surface. The giant squid has 8 arms and 2 longer feeding tentacles. The tentacles end in clubs lined with suckers, ringed with sharp serrated edges, like circular saw blades. These suckers can grip with enormous force. Sperm whales that have been examined show circular scars from squid sucker rings on their skin, scars up to 4 inches across. That tells you exactly how large those suckers were, and exactly how powerful the grip was during those deep fights in total darkness. The first confirmed photograph of a living giant squid in its natural habitat did not happen until 2004, when a Japanese research team spent several months lowering cameras more than 3,000 feet into the Pacific Ocean near the Ogasawara Islands. After hundreds of failed attempts across multiple expeditions, a giant squid struck a baited camera rig and got a tentacle caught on the hook. The team captured over 500 photographs during the 45-minute struggle before the squid tore free, leaving behind a tentacle over 18 feet long. That photograph shocked the scientific world. The squid in those images moved with precise, controlled aggression. Scientists had assumed deep-sea animals were sluggish and slow. The giant squid was neither. Its eye in the photograph was the size of a dinner plate. Its arms were as thick as a man's torso. And then researchers pointed out something that shifted the story entirely. The giant squid was not the largest squid in the ocean. Something else had been discovered in the waters around Antarctica, and it made the giant squid look manageable by comparison. The giant squid sounds like the top of the squid world. 60 feet long, eyes like dinner plates, tentacles lined with saw blade suckers. That sounds like the limit of what a squid can be. Then you hear about the colossal squid, and that limit disappears. The colossal squid was formally described by science in 1925, but it remained almost entirely unknown to the public for decades. The reason is simple: almost nothing has ever been caught. The entire scientific understanding of this animal comes from fewer than a handful of complete specimens, a collection of partial remains, and the beaks found inside sperm whale stomachs. The first fully intact adult colossal squid ever examined weighed over 1,000 pounds. Its body alone, without the tentacles, was as long as a full-size pickup truck. Scientists estimated the living animal at around 46 feet total length. For comparison, a school bus is about 35 feet long. The squid was longer. The eyes were the detail that stopped everyone cold. Each eye measured about 11 inches across. That is roughly the size of a soccer ball. They are the largest eyes of any animal ever documented on Earth. Scientists believe those eyes evolved specifically to detect the faint bioluminescent glow of predators moving in the deep dark, the subtle shimmer of a sperm whale's body moving through the blackness toward the squid. But the colossal squid's weapons are completely different from the giant squid's. Where the giant squid has suckers lined with serrated rings, the colossal squid has hooks, sharp, rotating hooks on its tentacles that can swivel and lock. Scientists who examined a recovered colossal squid specimen described the hooks as looking like something designed by an engineer rather than grown by biology. They rotate on a joint, allowing the squid to grip and tear simultaneously. The colossal squid lives in the deep southern ocean surrounding Antarctica. At depths, scientists estimate between 3,000 and 7,000 feet. The temperature down there hovers just above freezing. Almost nothing has ever been filmed there, and no one has ever observed a colossal squid hunting in the wild. What scientists do know comes from the animals it leaves marks on. Sperm whales in the Southern Ocean carry scars from colossal squid hooks on their faces and heads. These are scars left during the fight, when the whale was trying to eat the squid and the squid was fighting back. The circular impressions from the hooks are larger than anything from the giant squid's suckers. Some of the scar patterns suggest colossal squid, reaching lengths beyond what the few captured specimens showed. The difference between the two squid species matters for reasons beyond just size. They evolved separately, in different oceans, using different hunting strategies, and arrived at gigantism through slightly different paths. The giant squid lives in open ocean and uses speed and reach. The colossal squid lives in the coldest, deepest water and relies on patience, ambush, and weapons, so specialized they have no equivalent in any surface animal. Both of them grew enormous. Both of them grew enormous because the deep ocean pushed them in that direction. And the more you look at deep-sea gigantism, the more you realize that squid are just the most dramatic example of a pattern that runs through almost every type of animal down there. The next example is so unexpected that when the first one was pulled from a deep-sea sample jar, scientists genuinely thought they were looking at a misidentified specimen from a different location. Find a garden, turn over a rock or a piece of wood. There is a good chance you will find pill bugs hiding underneath. They're grey, oval, about half an inch long, and they curl into a ball when you touch them. Almost everyone has seen one. Almost no one finds them frightening. Now scale one up to the size of a football, give it 14 legs, put it at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, nearly 7,000 feet below the surface, let it go. That is the giant isopod, and it is a real animal. The giant isopod is closely related to the humble pill bug in your garden. They belong to the same biological order. The body plan is almost identical. The segmented shell, the 14 legs arranged in pairs, the same ability to curl into a defensive ball. But where a garden pill bug might weigh less than a gram, the largest giant isopods ever recovered weigh over 3 pounds and measure over 1.5 feet in length. The first giant isopod was collected in 1879 by a French zoologist working in the Gulf of Mexico. He pulled a juvenile male from a dredging net and was so startled by its size that he checked the specimen 3 times before accepting it was a real pill bug relative. The scientific community was skeptical. When his paper was published, other researchers demanded to see the specimen in person before they would believe it. Giant isopods live on the seafloor across the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Oceans at depths ranging from 500 to 7,000 feet. They are scavengers. They eat dead whales, fish, and squid that sink to the bottom, a food source scientists call marine snow when it is small particles, or whale falls when an entire carcass sinks to the seafloor. A whale fall is one of the most dramatic events in the deep ocean. When a whale dies near the surface, it sinks. As it descends, pressure builds around the carcass. By the time it reaches the seafloor, it has become a massive food deposit in an environment where food is almost non-existent. Giant isopods swarm these carcasses by the hundreds. Scientists who have filmed whale falls describe isopods eating with an intensity that looks almost frenzied compared to their usual slow movement across the seafloor. The giant isopod's size directly enables this feeding strategy. Larger bodies store more energy between meals. Scientists have kept giant isopods in aquariums and observed them going without food for over 4 years without dying. Their metabolism is so slow that the energy from a single large meal can sustain them for an extraordinary length of time. They can also hold their breath in a sense. Their gill chambers can trap water long enough for the animal to survive brief periods outside the water without dying. This is a relic adaptation from an ancestor that lived in shallower water millions of years ago. What makes the giant isopod one of the best examples of deep-sea gigantism is that the relationship between its surface relative and its deep relative is so direct and so visible. You can put a garden pillbug next to a photograph of a giant isopod, and the family resemblance is obvious. Same animal, different ocean depth, completely different scale. And if that transformation seems extreme, the next creature in this story shows how size can reach a scale that makes even the giant isopod look modest. The deep ocean is starving. That sounds dramatic, but it is accurate. Below the sunlit surface zone, the ocean receives almost no direct energy from the sun. No plants grow, no algae blooms. The only food available comes from above. Dead organisms and waste material that sinks slowly from the surface, taking days or even weeks to reach the bottom. By the time that material arrives, bacteria have broken much of it down. What reaches the seafloor is a slow, thin drizzle of organic particles. Scientists who study it call it marine snow, and it earns the name. Seen through a deep ocean camera, it drifts down like white flakes through black water. Beautiful and almost empty of calories. For an animal trying to survive on this, every calorie matters enormously. There is no room for waste. The body has to stretch each unit of energy as far as physically possible. And this is exactly where large body size stops being a disadvantage and becomes the most important survival tool in the ocean. Here is the physics of it. The larger an animal's body, the better its ratio of volume to surface area. A small body has a lot of surface compared to the mass inside it. That surface bleeds heat and loses energy quickly. A large body has much less surface relative to its total mass. It loses heat and energy more slowly per unit of body weight. This means a large body requires fewer calories per pound to maintain itself than a small body does. It is more thermally efficient. In an environment where calories are scarce, this efficiency is the difference between surviving and starving. Think of it like this. A small car and a large truck are both sitting in cold weather with their engines off. The small car, with its thin body panels and small interior, loses heat fast. The large truck, with more mass and insulated volume, holds its warmth longer. Feed them both the same amount of fuel. The truck travels farther. Deep sea animals are the trucks. They evolved to stretch a scarce resource across as much time as possible. Their bodies are built for endurance in a way that surface animals never needed to develop. But scarcity also creates something else. It raises the stakes of every meal. When food arrives rarely, the animal that gets there first and eats the most wins. Being large means being able to physically dominate a food source. A large isopod can sit on a whale carcass and eat for hours, while smaller competitors hover at the edges. A large squid can pursue prey that smaller animals could never overpower. Size becomes competitive in the most direct physical sense. Scientists have also noticed that deep-sea animals show far less social feeding behaviour than surface animals. On the surface, schooling fish or pack predators can overwhelm prey through numbers. In the deep, where food events are rare and spread far apart, solitary large animals tend to dominate. A single giant individual sitting over a food source eats more than a dozen small animals trying to push past each other. Over millions of years, this competitive pressure selected consistently for larger body sizes. The giant ate more at each meal, survived longer between meals and left more offspring. Their offspring inherited the tendency toward large size. This cycle repeated until the animals we see today emerged from the dark. The scale of that selection pressure becomes clear when you look at the next animal in this story. A creature that turns the concept of large body size into something that looks like a science fiction creation brought to life on the actual seafloor. Stand next to a compact car. Spread your arms as wide as they will go. You're probably reaching somewhere between 5 and 6 feet tip to tip. A large adult male Japanese spider crab stretches from the tip of one front leg to the tip of the other front leg, across 10 feet or more. That is wider than the car, and this crab is real, alive right now, and walking across the seafloor near Japan at this very moment. The Japanese spider crab holds the record for the widest leg span of any living arthropod on Earth. Arthropods are the group that includes all crabs, spiders, insects, and lobsters. Of every creature in that enormous group, the Japanese spider crab wins on size by a margin that is almost embarrassing for its competition. The legs themselves are extraordinary. Each one is long, jointed, and covered in small bumps and spines. The front 2 legs of the male are the longest and end in small claws used for feeding. The other 6 walking legs spread outward in a slow, deliberate movement that makes the crab look like it is moving through the water in slow motion. It actually is moving in slow motion. At depths between 900 and 2,000 feet, where most adults live, the cold water and crushing pressure mean that fast movement burns too many precious calories. The crab's body, the central shell, is a much more modest size. It reaches about 16 inches across. A large rock crab or Dungeness crab you might see in a grocery store has a shell of similar dimensions. The legs are where the size difference becomes staggering. They make up almost the entire visual impression of the animal. Scientists have debated exactly why leg length grew so extreme in this species. One leading idea points back to the cold, dark environment. In the blackness of the deep Pacific, having longer legs means being able to explore a wider area of seafloor without moving your body. The legs reach out and probe for food, for mates, for threats, while the body stays in one energy-conserving position. More reach equals more access without more effort. The Japanese spider crab also shows a behaviour that surprised researchers when it was first documented. During molting, when the crab sheds its old shell to grow a new larger one, it is briefly soft and defenceless. These enormous animals, normally solitary, gather in slightly shallower water during molting season. Scientists believe the warmer, shallower water helps speed up the hardening of the new shell. That gathering is one of the only moments when these giants are visible in numbers. Divers and underwater cameras have captured footage of dozens of them together, legs crossing and overlapping, moving through the water like a slow mechanical nightmare. The Japanese spider crab can live for approximately 100 years. In those 100 years, it never stops growing. Each molt allows it to add more length to those legs, more mass to its body. The largest specimens ever measured were almost certainly very old animals, still adding centimetres to their reach year by year, in water so cold and dark that time moves differently than it does at the surface. But leg span and body size are 2 different things. The creature in the next chapter wins the size competition in a category that matters even more: total body mass and power. And it does so in a way that surprised scientists not just with its size, but with the speed at which that size was reached. 300 million years ago, the land looked nothing like it does today. Dragonflies with wingspans of 2.5 feet cruised over swamps. Scorpions over 3 feet long moved through the undergrowth. Millipedes nearly 9 feet in length crawled through the dense ancient forests. Insects and their relatives ruled land, and they were enormous. Then something happened. They shrank. Within tens of millions of years, the giant land arthropods were gone, replaced by the small-bodied insects and arachnids that still dominate land today. The dragonflies that exist now have wingspans of 4 inches, not 2.5 feet. Scientists have spent decades figuring out what killed off land gigantism. The leading explanation points to oxygen. Those ancient giant insects lived during a period when oxygen made up about 35% of the atmosphere, compared to about 21% today. Higher oxygen meant that insect bodies, which breathe through tiny tubes running directly into their tissue, could grow larger before the tube system became too inefficient to supply their cells. When oxygen levels dropped back down, large insect bodies stopped being viable. The tubes could not reach the center of a giant body with enough oxygen to keep the cells alive. Smaller bodies won because they needed less oxygen per individual cell, and the delivery system could reach every cell efficiently. The deep ocean never had this problem. Water delivers oxygen through gills directly to the bloodstream, which then carries it everywhere in the body. This circulatory system scales with body size. As an animal grows larger, the circulatory system grows with it. There is no delivery bottleneck like the insect tube system. The body can grow, and the oxygen supply grows proportionally. This is why sea-based arthropods like the Japanese spider crab and the giant isopod could keep growing while their land relatives hit a ceiling. The ocean solved the oxygen delivery problem that killed off giant land arthropods by using blood and gills instead of tubes. There is also a weight problem on land that does not apply in the ocean. Those ancient giant dragonflies weighed only a few grams despite their giant wingspans, because they had to stay light enough to fly. The ancient giant millipedes and scorpions were heavier, but still constrained by what their exoskeleton could support against gravity while walking. An exoskeleton that works at 6 inches falls apart mechanically at 9 feet on land under full gravity. Underwater, the buoyancy of seawater counteracts gravity. A giant isopod the size of a football would collapse under its own weight on land within seconds. In the deep ocean, the water around it provides constant support. Its legs do not carry its full weight, they simply move it. The combination of better oxygen delivery, buoyancy removing the weight limit, and cold water slowing metabolism created an environment where arthropod gigantism did not need to die out. It simply moved from land to the deep sea and kept going. It kept going so far that the creatures alive today in the deep ocean make those ancient giant dragonflies look like the small ones, and almost none of what lives down there has been studied properly. Scientists estimate that less than 20% of the deep sea floor has been mapped at high resolution. Every new expedition to the deep brings back species that have never been seen before. Some of those species are giants that nobody anticipated. The next creature in this story was discovered exactly that way, pulled up from depths that no one had properly explored before, and found to be far larger than the animal it was supposed to be related to. A giant Pacific octopus begins its life as a tiny creature about the size of a grain of rice. It fits in a raindrop. Hundreds of them could sit on a postage stamp. The mother dies shortly after her eggs hatch, spending her last weeks guarding them without eating, weakening until she stops moving entirely. The hatchlings drift upward into the surface water with almost no chance of survival. But the ones that make it down to cold Pacific sea floor begin one of the most dramatic growth stories in the animal kingdom. Within 1 year, a surviving giant Pacific octopus reaches about 4 pounds, roughly the weight of a large bag of apples. By 2 years, it has passed 30 pounds. By 3 years, the largest individuals weigh over 150 pounds, and their arm span reaches 14 feet from tip to tip, wider than most living rooms. 3 years. From a rice grain to a creature the size of a large man, with arms stretching across 14 feet of seafloor. The giant Pacific octopus holds the title of the largest octopus species on Earth. The heaviest confirmed individual ever weighed came in at just over 600 pounds, with an arm span of 30 feet. That animal weighed as much as a dairy cow and could reach across a school bus. The growth rate is possible because of several factors working together. Cold Pacific water is rich in oxygen, which feeds the rapid cell growth. The octopus is a highly efficient hunter, eating crabs, clams, shrimp, and even small sharks. It has no skeleton, which means its body can grow in any direction without structural limits. And unlike most deep-sea creatures that conserve every calorie, the giant Pacific octopus burns energy at a relatively high rate during its short life. The short life is important here. Giant Pacific octopuses live for only 3 to 5 years. In that brief window, they grow as fast as the cold water allows and die. Their strategy is almost the opposite of the slow, centuries-long approach of the sleeper shark or the giant clam. They are sprinters in an ocean of marathon runners. Scientists studying these octopuses in the wild have documented hunting behaviours that show how size directly translates to power. A large adult can prey on animals that no small octopus could touch. They have been filmed catching and eating dogfish sharks. They have been observed pulling seabirds off the water surface from below. One particularly large individual was documented opening a shipping container-style cage used by researchers to store equipment underwater, using its arms to manipulate the latches with precision. Their intelligence tests at a level that surprises even octopus researchers. They solve mazes, recognize individual human faces, learn by watching other octopuses, and show signs of play behavior. In the cold dark of the Pacific sea floor, this level of intelligence combined with that physical size makes the giant Pacific octopus one of the most capable predators in the deep ocean. Their growth also illustrates something important about deep-sea gigantism. It is not always slow. Sometimes the ocean creates giants quickly. The mechanisms vary. The outcome keeps repeating. And in some deep-sea animals, the outcome reaches a scale that makes even a 14-foot octopus look modest. The next animal in this story has been causing shipwrecks in human mythology for centuries, but only recently revealed exactly how long it actually grows. Squeeze a piece of foam underwater, it compresses. Release it, and it tries to spring back. Foam contains air pockets, and air is compressible. The water pressure collapses those pockets. The foam shrinks. Now try the same thing with a sealed bag full of water. No matter how hard you squeeze, it barely changes shape. Water does not compress. The bag holds its form. Every deep-sea animal is the sealed bag. Their bodies are overwhelmingly made of fluid. Blood, tissue fluid, cellular fluid, the fluid inside their organs. Water-based through and through. When the ocean pushes in from every direction at depth, those fluids push back with equal force. The animal does not get crushed because the pressure equalizes across every surface simultaneously. This property of water-based tissue is what allows bodies to survive at depths where any air-filled structure would implode instantly. Submarines have thick metal hulls precisely because they contain air. A swimming animal with fluid-filled tissue needs no such armor. The ocean becomes the armor. But there is more to this than simple survival. The pressure that the deep ocean exerts on a large animal's body also acts as structural support for that body. On land, the bones and muscles of a large animal must work constantly against gravity to hold the body upright. The skeleton is a permanent, energy-expensive structure. An elephant skeleton makes up about 15% of its total body weight, precisely because the skeleton has to carry so much. In the deep ocean, pressure from all sides holds soft tissue in place. Animals can maintain large, complex body shapes without investing heavily in hard skeletal structures. This is why many deep-sea giants are soft-bodied or have relatively light skeletons compared to their surface counterparts of similar size. The squid is a perfect example. A colossal squid over 1,000 pounds has essentially no hard structure except its beak and a small internal gladius, a flexible blade of cartilage running through its body. Everything else is soft, fluid-filled tissue, held in shape by the ocean pressing in from all sides. Remove that pressure, which happens when a deep-sea creature is brought to the surface, and the results are dramatic. The tissues, no longer supported by pressure from outside, expand. Gases in the body come out of solution. Organs swell or rupture. Deep-sea fish hauled up in nets often arrive at the surface with their eyes bulging out, and their internal organs pushed out through their mouths, a gruesome result of removing the structural support those organs depended on. The body designs that work at depth do not work at the surface. They are built for one environment and one environment only. The pressure is not a threat the animals overcome. It is a resource they rely on entirely. Understanding this changes how you see the size records set by deep-sea animals. The colossal squid, the giant isopod, the oarfish, the siphonophore. None of these animals could support their own body plans on land or even in shallow water. Their gigantism is inseparable from the pressure that surrounds them. Take away the deep ocean, and you take away the structural environment that makes their size possible. This also means that the largest animals in the deep ocean are, in a very real sense, creatures that belong to an alien environment. They are built for conditions that most of Earth's surface is completely unlike. Their size is not a surprise or an accident. It is a precise biological solution to a precise set of physical conditions. And the most extreme version of that solution is an animal that most people have never heard of, one that looks like a sea serpent from mythology and grows longer than a semi-truck. In January 2010, a group of marine biology students snorkeling off the coast of California spotted something long and silver just below the surface. They thought it was a piece of pipe or cable from a nearby dock. As they swam closer, it moved. They pulled it gently towards shore. It was an oarfish, nearly 15 feet long, and it was still alive. The oarfish is the longest bony fish on Earth. Confirmed specimens have reached over 25 feet in length. Eyewitness accounts from fishermen and sailors, some of them credible and accompanied by photographs, describe animals stretching past 50 feet. For comparison, a standard school bus is about 35 feet. An oarfish at 50 feet would extend beyond one end of that bus and past the other. The body of an oarfish is unlike almost any other fish. It is long and narrow, silver blue with a red or pink crest of spines running along the entire length of its back like a mohawk. The fins and spines are tipped with bright red or orange. The whole animal looks like something designed to be spotted in the dark, like a living warning sign. Scientists believe the dramatic colouring and crest may be used to communicate with others of its species, since the fish are otherwise rarely seen in groups. The oarfish lives at depths between 600 and 3,000 feet. Almost everything known about its behaviour comes from dead or dying animals found at the surface or washed onto beaches, plus a small number of deep ocean camera sightings. It is so rarely observed alive in its natural habitat that a single video of a living oarfish moving through deep water is still treated as a significant scientific event. The fish swims vertically. This was one of the strangest discoveries in deep-sea biology. The oarfish holds its long body upright in the water, head up, tail pointing down, and moves by undulating its long dorsal fin. Scientists did not know this for certain until underwater cameras caught the behaviour in the early 2000s. Before that, researchers assumed it swam horizontally like a normal fish. Vertical swimming in such a long body serves a specific purpose. The oarfish feeds on small crustaceans, squid, and small fish that are concentrated in specific depth layers. By holding itself vertical in the water column, the oarfish can scan a large vertical range very quickly, sweeping its long body through layers of prey without having to change depth dramatically. The length itself is another product of the deep-sea gigantism equation. Cold water, low food density, minimal visual predation pressure, and the structural support of deep water pressure all push the oarfish toward extreme length. Its body is almost entirely muscle along the spine, a long locomotion engine with minimal organs and minimal body fat, which makes length the most energetically practical form for a deep ocean ambush predator. Sailors who encountered dying or surfaced oarfish for centuries described something impossible: a silver creature as long as a ship's mast, with a red crest and enormous eyes, writhing at the surface. The Norse legend of the Kraken drew from giant squid sightings. The legend of the sea serpent drew from the oarfish. Both were real animals, and both were using the deep ocean's conditions to grow into something that looked like myth. The oarfish grows extraordinarily long, but another creature in the deep ocean grows extraordinarily long in a completely different way, one that challenges the very definition of what counts as a single animal. Find the oldest living thing near where you grew up. It might be a tree, a tortoise, or an old fish in a lake. Whatever it is, it probably does not come close to what lives at the bottom of the ocean. The Greenland shark, also called the sleeper shark, lives in the cold, deep water of the North Atlantic and Arctic Ocean. Scientists estimate it reaches sexual maturity at around 150 years old. Its total lifespan extends past 400 years. A Greenland shark alive today was already old when the first European settlers reached the Americas. Researchers confirmed this in 2016 by using the chemistry of the shark's eye lenses. The lenses of a shark's eye build up layers throughout its life, like tree rings, and the radiocarbon signatures in those layers allow scientists to date them. When they analysed a large female Greenland shark, they calculated her age at approximately 400 years, with a margin of error that still kept her above 350. She weighed over 2,000 pounds, she was over 20 feet long, and she had been alive, slowly patrolling the cold, dark depths since before the invention of the steam engine. The reason for this extraordinary lifespan is the same cold temperature that drives gigantism in other ways. Cold slows metabolism so dramatically that the cellular machinery inside the shark's body barely wears down. Every chemical reaction in the body produces waste products. In warm animals, those waste products accumulate fast. Cells age, tissue degrades, the animal dies. In the Greenland shark, the cold environment slows those chemical reactions to a fraction of their warm water rate. Waste builds up so slowly that cells stay functional for decades longer than any surface shark's cells could. The biology of aging moves at a deep ocean pace, which is nearly glacial. The shark itself reflects this slowness in everything it does. It swims at roughly 1 mile per hour, about the pace of a slow walk. It prefers to stay near the seafloor where the water is coldest. It eats whatever comes within reach: dead whales, fish that stumble too close, seals and polar bears that fall through Arctic ice. It has been found with moose and horse remains in its stomach, animals it certainly did not hunt actively. But the Greenland shark is a scavenger and an ambush predator of sleeping animals. Scientists believe it preys on sleeping seals in the Arctic, approaching so slowly that the seal never detects it coming. The shark has parasites on its eyes that partially blind it, yet it appears to hunt successfully anyway. The deep, cold dark is its home environment, and it has had 400 years to learn every corner of it. Scientists studying the Greenland shark have found other large individuals estimated at over 300 years old. The possibility exists that some individuals swimming today are older than any confirmed specimen. An animal that started growing before the American Revolution might still be alive, still adding mass, still circling the Arctic seafloor at 1 mile per hour. The extreme age of the Greenland shark raises a question that nobody has fully answered. If deep-sea animals can live for 400 years, and deep-sea environments have existed for hundreds of millions of years, what is the absolute maximum size that enough time can produce? The answer might already be swimming somewhere below us, and the next creature in this story is the only animal on Earth that might rival it in terms of total body length and visual impact in the dark water. In 1977, a research submarine descended into the Pacific Ocean near the Galapagos Islands on a mission to study underwater geology. The scientists on board were geologists mainly. They were looking at seafloor rock formations, checking heat readings, mapping the terrain. They were not expecting to find animals at all at that depth. Then the cameras lit up the bottom, and what the scientists saw made them stop everything. A garden of white tubes, each one about as thick as a wrist, standing upright from the seafloor in dense clusters. At the top of each tube, a blood-red plume waved slowly in the warm current, rising from cracks in the rock below. The tubes were 8 feet tall. There were hundreds of them, carpeting the seafloor around the volcanic vents like a living field. These were giant tube worms, an animal that had never been seen before, living in a place where no animal was supposed to exist. The deep ocean floor, away from these volcanic vents, is genuinely one of the most food-poor environments on Earth. But the vents change everything within their immediate area. Cracks in the ocean floor, called hydrothermal vents, release superheated water rich in hydrogen sulfide and other minerals. Bacteria that live near these vents discovered an extraordinary trick. They extract energy directly from the chemical reactions in those minerals instead of from sunlight. This is called chemosynthesis, and it is the foundation of an entire ecosystem that does not depend on the sun at all. The bacteria produce organic material using chemical energy. Animals that eat those bacteria thrive. Larger animals eat those animals. a complete food chain runs entirely on volcanic chemistry, thousands of feet below any sunlight. Giant tube worms skip even that step. They have no mouth, no digestive system, no stomach. Instead, their tissue is packed with billions of symbiotic bacteria that perform chemosynthesis inside the worm itself. The worm's red plume, its feathery head, absorbs hydrogen sulfide and oxygen from the water. These chemicals feed the bacteria in its tissue. The bacteria produce nutrients. The worm uses those nutrients to grow. The result is extraordinary. Giant tube worms grow faster than almost any other known marine animal. From larvae to adult length can happen in under 2 years in productive vent environments. Adults reach 8 feet or more. The colonies they form can cover hundreds of square feet of seafloor around a single vent system. The tubes themselves are made of chitin, the same material as insect exoskeletons, and they are remarkably strong. Inside the tube, the worm's body is protected from the extreme heat near the vent, which can reach temperatures high enough to cook tissue. The worm positions itself to access the warm, chemical-rich water without being directly exposed to the hottest flow. Vent communities can persist for decades, growing and expanding as long as the vent remains active. When a vent shuts down, the community collapses within a few years, starved of its chemical food source. Scientists tracking vent systems over time have watched entire ecosystems appear, flourish, and die on a timescale of decades, fussed by deep ocean standards. The giant tube worm's existence shattered a foundational assumption in biology, that all life on Earth ultimately depends on sunlight. That assumption was wrong. And in the same volcanic deep that hosts these worms, another giant is living on a timeline that makes even the 400-year-old Greenland shark seem almost young. Imagine you were born 4 centuries ago. The world looked almost unrecognizable. The microscope had just been invented. Horses were the fastest way to travel. No one had ever seen a photograph, heard recorded music, or spoken on a telephone. Now imagine you are still alive today, still healthy, still growing. That is the life of a Greenland shark. Scientists confirmed in 2016 that the Greenland shark is the longest-lived vertebrate on Earth. A vertebrate is any animal with a backbone, and that group includes every fish, amphibian, reptile, bird, and mammal alive. Of all of them, the Greenland shark outlives everything. A team of researchers analysed dozens of sharks caught incidentally in fishing nets and examined the carbon chemistry of their eye lenses. Some of those animals were over 300 years old. The oldest was estimated at approximately 400 years, with a range that extended as high as 512. 500 years. The eye lens method works because the lens forms before birth and the outermost layers are laid down first, building inward throughout the shark's life. Each layer captures the radiocarbon signature of the ocean at the time it formed. Radiocarbon levels in the ocean shifted dramatically after nuclear weapons testing in the 1950s, leaving a clear marker in tissue formed after that period. Tissue formed before shows no such marker. By measuring where that boundary falls in the lens layers, scientists can establish a minimum age and work backward from there. The Greenland shark lives in water between 28 and 45 degrees Fahrenheit. That temperature is so close to freezing that ice forms in the water around it at the surface. At depth, the water is just cold enough to stay liquid and keep the shark's metabolism running at the slowest possible rate. The shark grows roughly 1 centimetre per year. At that rate, reaching its typical adult length of about 14 to 22 feet takes well over a century. The females do not reach reproductive maturity until they are at least 150 years old, scientists believe, which would make the Greenland shark the animal with the latest sexual maturity of any vertebrate ever studied. This has serious implications for conservation. A species that takes 150 years to start reproducing cannot recover quickly from overhunting. Remove too many adults, and the population collapses on a timescale that spans generations of human researchers. Scientists who documented this longevity immediately flagged the Greenland shark as potentially among the most vulnerable large animals on Earth to fishing pressure, despite the fact that it is rarely targeted deliberately. The shark's eyesight is severely limited. A parasitic copepod attaches to the cornea of almost every Greenland shark examined. These parasites are bioluminescent, and some researchers have suggested they may actually help the shark hunt by attracting curious prey to the shark's face. A 400-year-old nearly blind shark hunting in total darkness by attracting prey to its own face with its parasites is a level of strangeness that requires a moment to process. A Greenland shark alive right now in the Arctic has experienced 4 centuries of human history as background noise while moving through the same cold dark at 1 mile per hour. And somewhere deeper still in the ocean, a creature exists that does something even more extreme with time and size, one that forces scientists to rethink the definition of an individual organism entirely. A blue whale is the largest animal ever confirmed to have lived on Earth. From nose to tail, the biggest ones reach about 100 feet. That number gets used a lot as the upper limit of animal size. The ceiling, the record that nothing beats, the siphonophore beats it. A siphonophore found in the deep water off the coast of Australia in 2020 stretched to an estimated 150 feet in length, 1.5 times the length of a blue whale. Scientists examining the footage from a deep-sea research vessel described it as the longest animal ever recorded. The creature hung in the water like a vast glowing spiral of living tissue, rotating slowly in the darkness at a depth of over 2,000 feet. But the siphonophore breaks every rule about what makes something a single animal. A blue whale is one organism. Every cell in its body shares the same genetic identity, serves a unified biological system, and works together as a team under the control of one nervous system. You are one organism too. The siphonophore is a colony. It is built from thousands of individual bodies called zooids, each one genetically identical but specialized for a completely different job. Some zooids are built only for swimming. Others exist only to sting and capture prey. Others digest food. Others reproduce. Others provide structure. Each one is, technically, its own individual animal. Together they function as a single coordinated entity that acts, hunts, and grows as one. Think of it like a skyscraper made of people instead of bricks, where each person is a different worker doing only one job, and the whole building moves and feeds and thinks as a unit. Remove any of the workers, and the building loses a function. The workers cannot survive alone. The building cannot work without them. Together they become something that no single individual could ever be. The siphonophore uses its length as a hunting net. It spreads its tentacle-bearing zooids across a massive area of deep water, creating a curtain of stinging cells that any small fish or crustacean swimming through the dark will blunder into. The prey is paralyzed instantly by the sting, then passed along the colony to the digestion zooids, which break it down and distribute nutrients through the entire length of the organism. What makes the siphonophore relevant to the story of deep-sea gigantism is that its extreme length is a direct product of the deep ocean environment. Cold temperatures allowed the colony to grow slowly and steadily, without needing enormous caloric input per unit of body length. Darkness allowed the structure to expand into open water without being spotted and attacked from a distance. The absence of visual predators meant the glowing body, which produces bioluminescent light, was a useful hunting tool rather than a deadly advertisement. The siphonophore is also extraordinarily fragile. The zooids are connected by thin tissue. A strong current or a physical disturbance can shatter a colony into pieces. Each piece, if it contains the right mix of zooid types, can continue surviving and potentially grow into a new colony. Scientists have found pieces of siphonophores miles from where they believe the main colony lives. The deep ocean is full of fragments. A researcher who dives into deep water almost certainly passes through the broken remains of these animals without knowing it. What looks like floating threads or disconnected bits of organic material might be pieces of an organism that was, until recently, 150 feet long. The siphonophore forces a rethinking of what size means in the deep ocean. And the next creature forces a rethinking of something even more basic. What an eye is for, and how large one needs to be to see in a place where almost nothing emits light. In a completely dark room, your pupils open as wide as they physically can. They are trying to collect every possible photon of light. Even then, you see almost nothing. Your eyes have a hard biological limit on how wide the pupil can stretch, and that limit was set by millions of years of evolution in a world where complete darkness was the exception, not the rule. Deep-sea animals evolved with no such limit. In a world where darkness is permanent and the only light comes from the bodies of other creatures, eyes grew to capture every possible photon with maximum efficiency. The result is eyeballs that dwarf anything found near the surface, built to detect signals so faint that they would be invisible to any eye not specifically engineered for total darkness. The colossal squid has already appeared in this story for its mass and its hooks, but its eyes deserve a dedicated examination. Each one is 11 inches across. To picture that, hold up a standard dinner plate. That is roughly the diameter. Inside each eye, the pupil alone measures about 3.5 inches across. A human pupil at maximum dilation reaches about 1/3 of an inch. The colossal squid's pupil is 10 times wider than a human's at maximum. In terms of the light gathering area, that difference is enormous. A wider pupil collects more light in proportion to the square of the diameter. 10 times wider means 100 times more light captured per moment. Scientists believe the colossal squid evolved these massive eyes specifically to detect sperm whales moving through the dark water at depth. Sperm whales produce bioluminescent disturbances as they swim, disturbing the tiny glowing plankton around them and creating a faint wake of light. A large enough eye, sensitive enough, can detect that wake from hundreds of feet away in otherwise total darkness. By the time the whale is close enough to see the squid with its own smaller eyes, the squid has already spotted the threat and can begin evasive movement. The giant squid has similarly large eyes, proportionally, although not quite as extreme as its colossal cousin. Scientists examining dead specimens brought up from depth found that the optic lobes, the parts of the brain dedicated to processing visual information, were disproportionately massive compared to the rest of the brain. Vision in the dark deep is so critical that these animals dedicated enormous biological resources to it. Deep-sea fish show the same pattern through a different adaptation. Many deep-sea fish have tubular eyes, positioned to point straight upward. The tube shape works like a telephoto lens, concentrating the faint glow of bioluminescent animals above them into a bright focused point on the retina. These fish cannot look sideways or backward. They gave up peripheral vision entirely in exchange for maximum upward sensitivity. Some of these fish have evolved a second retina, in addition to the main one, stacked inside the same eye, allowing them to switch between two sensitivity modes depending on the intensity of the light source. No surface animal has this adaptation. It only appeared in creatures that spent millions of years hunting in near total darkness. The deep ocean did not just grow bodies to enormous scale, it also grew sensory organs to the edge of what biology can physically build. The eyes down there are not just big, they are the most light-sensitive eyes on the planet, built to function in conditions that would leave any surface predator completely blind. And the creature in the next chapter took the darkness problem in an entirely different direction, using light itself as a weapon, in a way that makes the deep ocean look less like a desert and more like an active battlefield. Imagine walking through a completely dark forest at night. You cannot see the trees, you cannot see the path, you cannot see anything around you. Now imagine that predators in that forest have learned to carry small flashlights and point them at the ground just ahead of where they walk. The prey animals, seeing the light, walk toward it out of curiosity. The predators do not chase, they wait. That is roughly how bioluminescence works as a hunting strategy in the deep ocean, and it connects directly to body size in ways that scientists are still working out. Bioluminescence is the production of light by living tissue. It happens through a chemical reaction involving a compound called luciferin, and an enzyme called luciferase. When these two interact with oxygen, they produce a cold, efficient glow with almost no heat wasted. The deep ocean is the most bioluminescent environment on Earth. Scientists estimate that over 90% of deep-sea animals produce some form of light. The anglerfish is the most famous example. The female anglerfish, which is the large one, carries a glowing lure on a modified spine that extends above her head like a fishing rod. The lure dangles in front of her massive mouth. She does not swim after prey. She holds position in the dark and lets the light do the work. Small fish, shrimp and other curious animals swim toward the glow and swim directly into her waiting jaws. The anglerfish's body is essentially a mouth with fins. Her jaws are disproportionately large relative to her body. Her stomach is stretchable to the point where she can swallow prey larger than herself. This body plan only makes sense in the context of bioluminescent lure hunting. She does not need speed. She does not need strong muscles. She needs a convincing lure and a stomach large enough to handle whatever the lure brings in. The size advantage here is specific. A larger anglerfish produces a brighter lure, since the organ that creates the glow is larger. A brighter lure attracts prey from farther away in the dark. More attraction range means more meals. More meals mean more growth. Bigger bodies produce more convincing lures. The cycle reinforces itself. Other deep-sea animals use bioluminescence differently. The dragonfish carries a photophore, a light-producing organ, below its eye that emits deep red light. Most deep-sea animals cannot perceive red light at all. To them, the red beam is invisible. But the dragonfish's eye has evolved to detect it. The dragonfish hunts by shining a red spotlight that only it can see, scanning the dark for prey that has no idea it is being illuminated. Some prey animals evolved counter-bioluminescence. They produced light from their bellies that matches the faint downwelling light from above, making them harder to spot from below. Predators evolved in response by developing eyes sensitive enough to detect the slight mismatch between the prey's produced light and the natural background. The arms race between hunters and hunted in the dark has been running for hundreds of millions of years, and both sides show evidence of it in their bodies. For giants in the deep, bioluminescence changes the hunting equation entirely. A large animal can afford to wait. It can hold position, expending minimal energy, while its lure or its glow draws meals toward it. The cold water slows its metabolism, so it needs fewer meals per month anyway. Size, patience, and light combine into a predator strategy that works in total darkness in a way that nothing on land has ever replicated. And some of the most extreme examples of this strategy belong to animals so alien in form that describing them requires starting over from the beginning of what a creature is allowed to look like. Antarctica is the coldest, most isolated place on Earth. The ocean surrounding it reaches temperatures just above freezing and stays there year-round. Almost nothing from the warmer world survives there. But for the creatures that evolve specifically in that cold, Antarctica is a paradise for size. The Antarctic sea spider is not actually a spider. It belongs to a group called pycnogonids, which are arthropods related to spiders and crabs, but different enough that scientists treat them as their own class entirely. On land and in warm, shallow water, sea spiders are tiny, fragile creatures with thread-thin legs and bodies small enough to sit on the tip of your finger. In the waters around Antarctica, they reach the size of a dinner plate. The largest Antarctic sea spiders have leg spans of over 14 inches. The body at the centre, called the trunk, is so small relative to the legs that it barely registers visually. The legs are the animal, 8 of them, reaching outward from a core the size of a marble, each one jointed and tipped with a small claw. The whole structure looks engineered rather than grown. A geometric precision to the leg arrangement, a mechanical quality to the movement. The sea spider's organs do not fit inside its tiny trunk. They extend into the legs, the gut, the gonads, and even part of the circulatory system run down through the hollow interior of the legs themselves. This is an extraordinary arrangement found in no other group of animals. The body had to distribute its organs into its limbs because the limbs grew so much larger than the trunk. Scientists exploring Antarctic waters have documented sea spider communities on the sea floor, where individuals of multiple species cluster around sponges and sea anemones, which they eat by inserting a long proboscis and sucking out the tissue. A single Antarctic sea spider can spend hours on one anemone, working methodically through its meal in no apparent rush. The cold removes urgency. Patience becomes the dominant trait. The extreme size of these animals in polar water is a well-documented pattern that researchers call polar gigantism. It operates on the same principles as deep-sea gigantism, but is driven primarily by cold temperature rather than depth. Some scientists argue polar gigantism and deep-sea gigantism are the same phenomenon, since the coldest deep-sea water shares temperature characteristics with Antarctic surface water. Others point out a key difference. In the deep sea, pressure adds to cold as a size driver. In Antarctica, the pressure near the surface is nearly normal, but the cold is just as extreme. Animals in both environments grow large, but through slightly different mixes of the same underlying forces. The Antarctic sea spider sits at the intersection of both. Some species live in shallow polar water. Others have been found at significant depths in the Southern Ocean, where cold and pressure work together. The largest individuals tend to come from the deepest, coldest water, consistent with the combined effect. What the Antarctic sea spider shows most clearly is that arthropod gigantism is not a quirk of one location or one species. It is a response that appears independently across multiple lineages whenever the conditions are right. The deep ocean creates it in one way. Antarctic cold creates it in another. The body reaches the same conclusion from two different starting points. But size in the deep ocean does not always mean the same thing in every depth range. Some animals are giants at one depth, and much smaller versions of themselves just a few thousand feet above or below. The next chapter explains the strange geography of deep-sea gigantism and why some creatures only hit their maximum size in a precise window of the water column. Picture the ocean as a layered system, like a stack of invisible floors in a building. Each floor has its own temperature, pressure, oxygen level, food supply, and light intensity. Animals that evolved on one floor are built specifically for those conditions. Move them up or down by even a few hundred feet, and survival becomes difficult. Deep-sea gigantism does not apply equally to every floor of that building. It follows a pattern that researchers have been mapping for decades, and the pattern shows that maximum size in most species occurs within a specific depth band, with smaller individuals both above and below it. The oxygen minimum zone explains part of this. Between roughly 300 and 3,000 feet in many ocean regions, dissolved oxygen drops to its lowest point in the water column. Animals trying to grow large in this zone face a constant oxygen shortage. Their cells cannot get enough fuel to support high growth rates. The animals that live there tend to be smaller than those above and below. Below the oxygen minimum zone, cold water carries more dissolved oxygen back into solution. Pressure increases, but so does the oxygen supply. Animals that evolve below this zone have access to the rich oxygen that cold deep water provides, and their bodies reflect it. This is where many of the true giants live, below the oxygen shortage band, in the cold, dark, oxygen-rich water between 3,000 and 13,000 feet. Above the oxygen minimum zone, in the upper sunlit layers, plenty of oxygen exists, but so do predators, competitors, and the metabolic demands of warm water. Animals there stay smaller because the selective pressures work against large size. The result is a size-by-depth curve that looks almost like a bell curve in some species. Small near the surface, growing larger as depth increases through the transition zone, reaching maximum size in the deep cold zone, then showing some reduction in the very deepest trenches where even cold-adapted species face conditions beyond their design. The giant amphipod, a crustacean related to sand fleas, illustrates this curve dramatically. In shallow water, amphipods are a few millimeters long. In the deep Pacific below 10,000 feet, they reach over a foot long. The size increase is continuous with depth through most of the water column. Scientists sampling amphipods at different depths from the same general ocean region found a smooth progression. Deeper sample, larger animals. The seamounts, underwater mountains that rise from the deep sea floor to varying heights, complicate this picture. A seamount top sitting at 2,000 feet has different conditions from the open water at the same depth. Currents hit the seamount and deflect upward, pulling nutrients from depth. The concentrated food supply at these specific locations lets animals grow larger than the surrounding open ocean at the same depth would support. Some of the largest individual specimens of several deep-sea species have been collected from seamount environments rather than flat open ocean floor. The geography of the seafloor matters, creating local pockets where the conditions for gigantism are amplified beyond the baseline deep ocean average. Understanding the depth zone pattern also helps predict where undiscovered giants are most likely to live. The richest zones for size are deep, cold, below the oxygen minimum layer, and near structures like seamounts that concentrate food. Any unexplored area with those characteristics is a priority target for future deep ocean research. And the species found in those zones continue to surprise scientists every time a new expedition goes down. The next animal in this story was discovered by accident, in water that everyone assumed had been studied, and its size and feeding strategy turned out to be completely unknown to science until that single chance encounter. Every animal on the surface lives with the knowledge that something might be hunting it. A deer in a forest listens constantly. A fish near a reef watches the shadows. Even large surface animals like elephants or hippos keep awareness of lions and crocodiles. The presence of predators shapes bodies directly. Animals evolve speed, camouflage, hard shells, or toxic skin to survive the attention of something larger. In most of the deep ocean, that pressure disappears. Below 5,000 feet, the number of large active predators drops dramatically. The sperm whale, the most dedicated deep predator, hunts mostly between 1,000 and 6,000 feet. Below that, it becomes rare. The few large predatory fish at extreme depth are slow, ambush-oriented, and spread thin across vast areas of seafloor. The chance of any individual prey animal encountering an active predator in the deep is far lower than at the surface. The consequence for prey species is freedom, evolutionary freedom. When the primary threat is starvation rather than predation, the body stops optimizing for evasion and starts optimizing for size. Shells can become thinner because nothing is trying to crack them. Speed becomes less critical because nothing is chasing you. Camouflage becomes irrelevant in darkness. The energy that surface animals pour into defensive structures and escape strategies can instead go into growth. Scientists examining deep sea crustaceans found that their shell thickness relative to body size is consistently lower than their shallow water relatives. They are less armoured. The defence they sacrificed was made unnecessary by the absence of the predators that made it useful near the surface. The deep-sea giant clam is a stark example. Clams near the surface have thick, heavy shells, a response to crabs, starfish and fish that attack them regularly. Giant clams in deeper water, at certain depth ranges, have thinner shells relative to their body size than their shallow cousins, even as the body itself grows to 500 pounds. The threat that made thick shells necessary does not exist in the same numbers down there. The absence of visual predators also allows bizarre body shapes to persist. A deep-sea creature can have wildly inefficient body geometry, strange proportions, or extreme specializations that would make it easy prey in a world full of fast hunters. The black swallower fish, for example, has an extendable jaw and stomach that allow it to swallow prey 3 times its own length. On the surface, a fish shaped around a distensible stomach would be slow, oddly proportioned, and vulnerable. In the deep dark, where nothing is chasing it, that extreme feeding adaptation makes it one of the most effective predators in its zone. The logic compounds over millions of years. Less predation pressure allows larger bodies. Larger bodies gain advantages in food competition. Those food advantages produce more offspring. More offspring inherit the tendency toward large size. The population as a whole drifts toward the upper end of the size range that the environment's food supply can support. Scientists modelling this process found that the reduction of predation pressure alone, even without cold temperature, can drive a measurable increase in average body size across a population over time. Add the cold, add the oxygen, add the structural support of pressure, and the effect becomes the deep sea giant. Every force multiplies every other force. The math of it, run over millions of years, produces creatures that look like the limit of what biology can physically construct. And then the ocean produces something that goes beyond even that limit. Something so improbable in its feeding strategy that scientists who first discovered it refused to believe the measurements were accurate. On November 15th, 1976, a United States Navy research vessel was working in the deep Pacific Ocean near Hawaii. The crew hauled up a sea anchor that had been dragging at about 500 feet below the surface. Tangled in the anchor's parachute was a shark, a large shark, one that no scientist on Earth had ever seen before. It was over 14 feet long. It weighed about 1,600 pounds. Its most striking feature was its mouth, which measured over 4 feet wide, lined with hundreds of tiny teeth arranged in rows and edged with what appeared to be a reflective silver or white lining. The crew photographed it before it died. Researchers who examined those photographs were certain it was a new species. The name they gave it matched the most obvious thing about it: megamouth shark. In the entire history of marine biology, no new species of large shark had been discovered since the early 20th century. The ocean, scientists had assumed, was well enough mapped that any large shark would have crossed paths with a human observer long before 1976. The megamouth proved that assumption wrong so decisively that it forced a rethinking of how well the deep ocean was actually understood. The megamouth is a filter feeder. Its enormous mouth is not built for biting. It is built for opening wide and swimming through the water, allowing tiny shrimp-like animals called euphausiids to flow in and get filtered through a structure behind its teeth. Think of it as a moving sieve. The vast mouth sweeps through clouds of small prey and captures thousands of them in a single pass. Filter feeding at that size is a strategy also used by whale sharks and basking sharks near the surface. But the megamouth does it in much deeper water, at depths between 400 and 800 feet during the day, rising toward the surface at night to follow the vertical migration of the prey swarms it feeds on. This daily up and down migration was one of the most surprising findings when researchers began attaching tracking devices to captured megamouth sharks. Since that first discovery, fewer than 100 megamouth sharks have ever been confirmed by scientists. Most were caught accidentally in fishing nets or found dead on beaches. Only a handful have been observed alive underwater. What is known about their behaviour and biology comes almost entirely from those accidental captures and brief observation windows. The megamouth's rarity is almost certainly a function of depth. It spends most of its life below 500 feet, where fishing nets rarely go, and where ocean cameras have only recently begun operating with any regularity. Scientists suspect the species is far less rare than the encounter record suggests. The actual population is simply living in water that humans almost never visit in useful numbers with useful equipment. The reflective lining inside the megamouth's mouth may function as a lure, creating a glowing or shimmering effect that attracts the small creatures it feeds on into its open jaws. This would make it another example of bioluminescence or structural light being used as a hunting tool in the dark, but scientists have not yet been able to study a living animal in its natural habitat long enough to confirm this. 49 years after its discovery, the megamouth remains one of the least understood large animals on Earth. Its size, its behaviour, its reproduction, and even a reliable estimate of its population are all still essentially unknown. It is a 14-foot shark discovered less than 50 years ago, and we still barely know it exists. The ocean has been hiding creatures this large in plain sight, And the next story proves that when conditions shift even slightly, animals that have been stable for millions of years can change in ways that concern every scientist who studies them. The Mariana Trench is the deepest place on Earth. At its lowest point, a location called the Challenger Deep, the seafloor sits nearly 7 miles beneath the surface. Pressure there is over 1,000 times the pressure at sea level. Temperature hovers just above freezing. It is among the most extreme environments anywhere on the planet. For decades, scientists assumed that below a certain depth, life would simply stop. The pressure too high, the food too scarce, the conditions too harsh. When early deep ocean dredging equipment did bring up creatures from extreme depths, the animals were usually small and fragile, tiny worms and single-celled organisms. The evidence seemed to confirm that large animals could not exist at the very bottom of the ocean. Then in 2012, a research team lowered camera traps into the Mariana Trench and left them at the bottom. When the traps came back up, the footage showed something the team had not expected. Amphipods, hundreds of them, swarming around the bait in the camera trap. And these were not the tiny millimetre-scale amphipods of shallow water. Some of them were 11 inches long, others were close to a foot. For an animal related to the tiny sand fleas that hop around on a beach, reaching nearly a foot in length at the very bottom of the deepest trench on Earth is extraordinary. Amphipods at that depth experience a physical environment unlike anywhere else in the ocean. The pressure is so extreme that scientists initially assumed it would prevent any biological structures above a certain size from functioning. Cell membranes, which are made partly from fatty molecules that can be compressed, were expected to become too rigid to function normally at such pressure. But the deep trench amphipods have cell membranes with a different chemical composition than their shallow relatives, one that stays flexible even under the crushing pressure of the trench floor. Their gigantism is a compressed version of the same story that plays out across the deep ocean. Cold water, abundant dissolved oxygen, almost no predation pressure, food concentrated around chemical seeps and hydrothermal activity, and millions of years of evolution in isolation. The trench floor is cut off from surrounding ocean by its extreme depth, which means the animals there have evolved independently from their shallower relatives for a very long time. Scientists also found that the amphipods at the bottom of the trench showed evidence of high levels of pollutants in their tissue, specifically industrial chemicals called polychlorinated biphenyls and polybrominated diphenyl ethers. These chemicals were widely manufactured in the 20th century and banned in most countries decades ago. They reached the trench by attaching to organic particles that sank from the surface. The amphipods ate those particles and accumulated the chemicals in their fat. The discovery of industrial pollution in the deepest animals on Earth, in a place no human had ever physically visited before the 1960s, was one of the more sobering findings in recent deep ocean science. The deepest, most isolated environment on the planet was already contaminated before scientists had finished discovering what lived there. Despite that contamination, the amphipods at the bottom of the Mariana Trench continue to thrive in numbers that surprised researchers, and their existence confirms a point that every chapter of this story has been building toward. The forces that create giants in the deep ocean are so powerful and so consistent that they produce results even in the most extreme and isolated environments on Earth. But a few of those environments have something extra. Structures that focus and amplify the forces of gigantism into something beyond what the open ocean floor produces on its own. In the middle of the ocean, thousands of feet below the surface, mountains rise from the seafloor. Some of them peak hundreds of feet below the waves and never break the surface. Others are barely submerged. A few breach the surface and become islands. Most are invisible from above, unknown to anyone not carrying specialized equipment. These are seamounts, and the ecosystems on top of them are among the most productive and least explored environments in the deep ocean. The reason seamounts create exceptional conditions comes from oceanography. In the open ocean, deep cold water stays deep. The nutrients it carries, mostly dissolved chemicals from dead organic material that sank from the surface, stay locked below the zones where sunlight can drive photosynthesis. The nutrients and the light never meet. The open ocean surface is, in many places, a near biological desert because of this separation. Seamounts disrupt that separation. When ocean currents hit the steep flanks of an underwater mountain, the water deflects upward in a process called upwelling. Cold, nutrient-rich water from depth gets pushed toward the surface. There, it meets sunlight. Phytoplankton explode in a bloom of growth. Zooplankton feed on the phytoplankton. Small fish feed on the zooplankton. The food chain stacks up quickly around the seamount in a way that simply does not occur in the surrounding open water. For the deep-sea animals living on and near the seamount, this concentrated food supply is transformational. Creatures that would otherwise spend weeks between meals find consistent feeding opportunities within a limited area. Their bodies do not need to stretch calories across long dry periods. They can invest more energy in growth. The result is that seamounts tend to host larger individuals of many species than the surrounding open ocean does. Scientists who have compared specimens of the same deep sea fish species taken from seamount habitats versus open ocean habitats found consistent size differences, with seamount individuals larger on average. The food supply advantage directly translates to body size. Seamounts are also biodiversity hotspots. Because upwelling draws in organisms from surrounding waters, and the concentrated food supply supports a dense community, seamounts host more species per square mile of sea floor than almost any other deep habitat. Species that rarely encounter each other in the open ocean come together near seamounts, including species that had never been seen before their discovery there. Over 300 species new to science have been described from seamount environments over the past few decades. Many of these are larger than the closest related species known from non-seamount habitats. The combination of food concentration and the evolutionary isolation that some seamounts provide, especially older ones that have existed for millions of years, creates conditions where deep-sea gigantism runs further than elsewhere. Deep-sea corals grow on seamounts in enormous thickets. Some of these coral colonies are over 4,000 years old, among the oldest living structures on Earth. They provide habitat for hundreds of other species, adding another layer to the food web and creating shelter that allows large animals to live and hunt in a more structured environment than the open sea floor. But every seamount ecosystem depends on that upwelling staying cold and nutrient-rich. Change the temperature of the surrounding water, and the upwelling loses its chemical advantage. The food web weakens, the size advantage disappears, and something is already beginning to change the temperature of the deep water surrounding seamounts around the world. Pick up a clamshell on a beach. It weighs almost nothing. The shell is thin, the animal inside small, the whole thing easily held in one hand. Now scale that clam up to 500 pounds, give it a shell 4 feet across, and place it in the warm, shallow water of the Pacific Ocean. That is the giant clam, and it is the largest bivalve, the largest two-shelled animal that has ever existed. The giant clam grows its entire life. It never stops adding mass to its shell or tissue, and it can live for over 500 years. A 500-year-old giant clam was a living organism before the first European ships crossed the Pacific. It has been sitting in the same spot on the reef, opening and closing its shell slightly each day, filtering water and harvesting sunlight for centuries. The oldest confirmed giant clam specimens push past 200 years, with some estimates from shell growth rings suggesting 500 is achievable, and possibly exceeded in individuals never directly studied. The giant clam reaches its extreme size through a combination of strategies unusual for the deep-sea discussion, because the giant clam is a shallow water animal. It lives in sunlit tropical reefs, not the cold, dark deep. Its gigantism comes from a different mechanism, a partnership with photosynthetic algae. Inside the giant clam's mantle tissue, the colourful lip visible when the shell is open, live millions of single-celled algae. These algae photosynthesize, using sunlight to produce sugars, and they share those sugars with the clam. The clam positions itself to maximize the algae's light exposure, effectively farming sunlight inside its own body. This steady internal food supply supplements what the clam filters from the water, giving it a consistent energy income that allows slow but continuous growth for centuries. The giant clam is one of the clearest examples in nature of what happens when a reliable food supply meets a long lifespan and a body with no built-in growth limit. Given enough time, even modest annual growth rates compound into extraordinary size. Scientists studying giant clamshells as climate records discovered that the growth rings inside the shell, laid down one per year like tree rings, encode the water temperature of each year the clam lived through. An old giant clam is essentially a biological thermometer with a 500-year record inside it. Paleoclimatologists have used these records to reconstruct ocean temperature patterns going back centuries, finding data in the clam shells that matched or contradicted ice core records from the poles. The giant clam faces significant conservation pressure. Its meat is considered a delicacy in parts of Asia. Its shell is used decoratively. Overharvesting reduced populations across much of the Pacific in the 20th century to near extinction in some areas. Animals that take decades to reach reproductive maturity, let alone 500 years to reach full size, cannot rebound quickly when populations collapse. Breeding programs have restored some populations in the Philippines, Palau, and other Pacific Island nations. Young clams grown in hatcheries and placed on reef systems can survive and grow, eventually reaching the sizes their ancestors reached before overharvesting began. But the truly ancient, truly massive individuals, the ones that survived 5 centuries, are almost certainly gone from most reefs. The story of the giant clam is one of the few places in this whole account where human activity directly ended something that time and biology had spent centuries building, and the giant clam is not the only creature on this list facing that kind of pressure. The chapter that follows describes a change happening right now in the deep ocean, one that threatens the specific conditions that allow every animal in this story to exist. Most fish eat prey smaller than themselves. A bass eats a minnow, a tuna eats a mackerel. The size relationship between predator and prey is fairly stable across most of the surface ocean, and the bodies of predatory fish reflect this. Their jaws open to accommodate prey that is somewhat smaller than their head, their stomachs can stretch a little, and the whole system resets within hours after a meal. The black swallower threw this entire framework out. Found in the deep ocean between 3,000 and 10,000 feet, the black swallower is a small fish, usually around 10 inches long. Its colouring is exactly what the name suggests. Deep, matte black all over, with a slightly iridescent sheen visible in camera light. In the dark water where it lives, that colouring makes it essentially invisible. It is a fish shaped entirely around one idea, eating something far too large to eat. The black swallower's stomach is a separate, highly specialised organ that sits outside and below its main body cavity. It is completely transparent. When empty, it is small enough to barely register visually. When full, it can inflate to a size that extends below the fish's body and behind its tail, sometimes doubling or tripling the visible length of the animal. The contents of the stomach remain visible through the transparent wall. Researchers examining black swallowers have found prey fish inside the stomach that are longer than the swallower itself. The largest documented case involved a black swallower that had swallowed a fish over 4 times its own body weight. The swallowed fish was taller than the swallower's body was wide. The black swallower had somehow stretched its jaw and throat to accommodate this, then sealed the prey inside its stomach and allowed digestion to begin. This feeding strategy exists because of the deep ocean's food scarcity. When a meal appears, the black swallower cannot afford to eat a fraction of it and leave the rest. The next meal might be days or weeks away. Every possible calorie in the encountered prey needs to be captured. A stomach that can expand to accommodate prey far larger than normal allows the fish to bank enormous energy reserves from a single encounter. The transparent stomach also serves a practical function. Decomposition of prey inside the stomach produces gas. If the gas built up inside an opaque enclosed stomach chamber, The pressure could be dangerous. The black swallower's stomach is thin-walled and somewhat permeable, allowing gas to escape into surrounding tissue and disperse. Even so, scientists have found dead black swallowers floating at the surface, apparently having consumed prey that decomposed faster than could be digested, producing enough gas to float the fish to the surface against its will. The black swallower's jaw works through a mechanism that turns the bones of the mouth into a ratcheting system. The lower jaw dislocates and extends outward to accommodate prey wider than the fish's normal resting mouth size. The teeth face inward, so once prey enters the mouth, the inward-facing hooks prevent it from escaping while the jaw works it deeper. Every part of the black swallower's body, the jaw, the teeth, the expandable stomach, the body proportions, reflects a single evolutionary commitment. In a world where food is rare and unpredictable, capture everything you can find, regardless of size, and store it until it is gone. In an environment that tests every body to its limit, the black swallower passed the test by redesigning the entire concept of a stomach. What the next chapter describes is what happens when the environment itself begins to fail. The deep ocean has been cold for millions of years, not slightly cold, cold enough to maintain the conditions that built every giant in this story. The near-freezing temperatures that slow metabolism, concentrate oxygen, support long lifespans, and provide structural pressure have been stable across timescales that dwarf all of human history. The animals adapted to those temperatures have had millions of years to tune every cell, every organ, every behavior to that precise cold. That cold is now changing. Scientists tracking ocean temperature at depth have documented a consistent warming trend across all major ocean basins since systematic measurements began in the mid-20th century. The deep ocean warms more slowly than the surface, and the trend at depth is subtle by everyday standards, fractions of a degree per decade. But for animals whose entire biology is calibrated to temperatures within 1 or 2 degrees of freezing, fractions of a degree matter enormously. Metabolic rate in cold-blooded animals is directly tied to temperature. A 1 degree Celsius increase in water temperature increases the metabolic rate of a cold water fish by roughly 10 to 15%. That means the animal burns through its stored energy faster. It needs to eat more often to maintain the same body mass. In an environment where food is already scarce and rare, eating more often is a demand that the deep ocean cannot easily meet. The result, playing out slowly across generations too long for any individual scientist to track in a single career, is that the size advantage of large bodies in the deep ocean begins to erode. A large body that previously coasted on stored energy through long gaps between meals now runs through its reserves faster. The caloric math that favoured giants for millions of years starts to shift against them. Scientists studying shallow cold water species, which are easier to monitor than deep species, have already documented shrinking average body sizes in response to ocean warming. Several fish species in the North Atlantic have shown measurable reductions in maximum adult size over the past 50 years. Researchers attribute the trend directly to temperature increases in those waters. The pattern is expected to extend into deeper water as warming penetrates downward. The oxygen content of the deep ocean is also declining. Warmer water holds less dissolved oxygen. The oxygen minimum zone, that layer of the water column where oxygen drops and animals struggle to grow large, is expanding. It is getting thicker and pushing both upward and downward in many ocean regions. Animals caught inside the expanding zone face oxygen conditions that their evolution never prepared them for. The Greenland shark, with its 400-year lifespan and 1 centimetre per year growth rate, represents a particular vulnerability. A species that requires 1.5 centuries to reach reproductive age cannot adapt quickly to a changing environment. The genetic variations that might allow adaptation to slightly warmer water exist in the population, but selection for those variants requires many generations. At a reproduction rate of once every 1.5 centuries, meaningful evolutionary adaptation to rapid climate change is essentially impossible within any useful time frame. Deep-sea gigantism took millions of years to build. The conditions that created it are shifting on a scale of decades. The giants down there are the last product of an environment that may not exist in its current form within centuries. And the disturbing part is that most of what lives down there has never been seen. The moon is better mapped than the deep ocean floor. This sounds impossible until you think about it. The moon has no water on it. Every square mile of its surface sits exposed to observation from telescopes and orbiting spacecraft. Scientists have built detailed maps of the entire lunar surface, including features a few feet across. The deep ocean floor is covered by miles of water. Until recently, seeing it required physical descent, an undertaking so expensive and technically difficult that the total time humans have spent observing the deep sea floor is less than the total time spent on the moon. Satellite-based sonar mapping has improved dramatically in recent decades. Scientists can now get rough elevation maps of the entire ocean floor from space, using the subtle variations in ocean surface gravity caused by underwater mountains and trenches. But the resolution of those satellite maps is limited to features over 3 miles across. Anything smaller, which includes every individual seamount below a certain size, every deep-sea canyon smaller than a canyon system, and every local habitat patch on the seafloor is invisible. Only about 20% of the seafloor has been mapped at the resolution needed to see features smaller than 1 mile across. The remaining 80% is a blank space in human knowledge, covering an area larger than all of Earth's land surface combined. Every major expedition to previously unmapped deep seafloor returns with new species. This is not a rare occurrence or a lucky coincidence. It happens with enough regularity that deep ocean biologists no longer treat it as remarkable. A new deep-sea expedition that does not find at least a few undescribed species is considered unusual. In 2023, a research expedition to the deep Pacific mapped a previously unknown seamount system and collected specimens from its flanks. The team found 39 species believed new to science in a single 3-week expedition. Several of them were significantly larger than any described relative in the same family. One polychaete worm from the samples measured over 4 feet in length, far exceeding any previously known member of its genus. The implication is uncomfortable. Every chapter of this story so far has described giants that science has already found and studied, but the 80% of the seafloor that remains unmapped contains whatever science has not found yet. The statistical likelihood that the largest individuals of any deep-sea species already discovered live in unmapped areas, away from the sampling locations where known specimens were collected, is high. The deepest trenches are the least explored of all. Of the roughly 30 deep ocean trenches on Earth, most have been visited only a handful of times. Some have been physically descended into only once. The floor of the Mariana Trench has been visited by humans fewer times than humans have visited the moon. What has been found in the trenches on those rare visits keeps science from drawing comfortable conclusions about maximum animal size. Every time the floor of a new trench has been examined in detail, it has contained animals that were either new to science, larger than expected, or living in conditions previously thought to exclude large life. The unmapped ocean is not an empty space. It is a populated space full of animals living and growing and dying without any human awareness of their existence. Some of those animals, by the same logic that produced every giant already described in this video, are almost certainly larger than anything yet recorded. Most of the giants described so far get larger as depth increases, following the basic logic of deep-sea gigantism. Cold, pressure, darkness, and food scarcity all intensify with depth, and so does the size advantage for large bodies. But some species break this pattern in a way that tells a more specific story about how environment shapes biology. The giant isopod is one example. The largest individuals live between 500 and 3,000 feet. Go deeper than 3,000 feet, and isopods begin to shrink again. The truly extreme depths show smaller isopods than the mid-depth giants, despite colder temperatures that should theoretically favour larger size. The reason is food. Below 3,000 feet in most ocean regions, even the sparse marine snow that drifts down from above becomes rarer still. The particles that reach those depths are smaller and less caloric. There is simply less material arriving per square foot of sea floor. Large bodies, which need more total energy even if they use it efficiently, face a ceiling imposed by food availability rather than temperature or pressure. The sweet spot for giant isopod size is the mid-depth zone where cold water, sufficient pressure, low predation, and still adequate food supply all overlap. Remove any of those factors, and the size record for that species shrinks. This depth-specific pattern repeats across multiple species. Deep-sea fish called rat tails, which make up a large fraction of deep ocean fish biomass, show peak body size in a specific depth range and smaller individuals both above and below it. Giant sea cucumbers, which filter sediment for organic material on the seafloor, reach their largest size in depth zones, where both sediment quality and temperature match their optimal range. Scientists call this depth-specific body size pattern the niche optimum. Every species has an environmental combination that maximizes its growth potential. Outside that combination, growth slows, maximum size decreases, and competitive advantage erodes. The niche optimum idea matters beyond just describing what lives where. It provides a framework for predicting where undiscovered giants are most likely to occur. If a species is known to peak in size at a certain depth range, an unexplored seafloor exists at that depth in a connected ocean basin, the probability that larger individuals exist in the unexplored area is meaningful. Researchers have used this logic to target specific seamounts and trench walls for exploration. The results have consistently supported the prediction. Areas identified as likely niche optima for known species have, when explored, produced the largest individual specimens ever collected for those species. Some animals have an even tighter niche requirement. Certain species of deep-sea shrimp show gigantism only in one ocean basin, and not in adjacent basins at the same depth. The barrier between basins is subtle. A slight difference in water chemistry, a slight variation in current patterns, or a difference in the type of organic material reaching the sea floor. These small differences are enough to shift the size maximum across a boundary that any swimmer could cross without noticing it. The specificity of deep-sea gigantism is one of its most striking features. It is not a blunt instrument that makes everything bigger below a certain depth. It is a precise biological response to a precise set of environmental conditions. Change any condition enough, and the size advantage disappears. Keep all conditions aligned, and the result is an animal that defies every expectation built from surface experience. And in the deepest, coldest, most food-rich pockets of the unexplored ocean, those conditions may be more perfectly aligned than anywhere science has yet examined. What lives there remains an open question. Imagine a creature longer than a blue whale, living in water too deep for casual observation, in an ocean that is mostly unmapped, following the same biological rules that produced the colossal squid, the siphonophore, and the oarfish. There is no confirmed evidence that such an animal exists. There is also no confirmed evidence that it does not. This is the position deep-sea biology occupies at the beginning of the 21st century. Every decade, a new large animal unknown to science gets confirmed from the deep ocean. The megamouth shark in 1976, the colossal squid formerly described in 1925, but practically unknown, until several specimens were examined in the late 20th century. Giant siphonophores photographed in 2020, deep trench amphipods in 2012. Each of these discoveries came not from targeted searches but from incidental encounters, equipment tests, or simple luck. The deep ocean has no natural reason to deliver its largest inhabitants to human observation. Large animals in any environment are rarer than small ones, simply because it takes more resources to build and sustain a large body. In the deep ocean, where food is scarce, the largest animals are the rarest of the rare. A creature the size of a blue whale living at 3,000 feet depth would be one of the least frequently encountered animals on the planet. Scientists have estimated the total area of deep-sea floor that has been directly observed by humans using cameras or physical equipment. It is approximately equal to the area of a few large cities. The rest, hundreds of millions of square miles of seafloor, has never been directly seen. Something genuinely enormous could live in that space and avoid encounter with human technology indefinitely. Several lines of indirect evidence keep the question open. Sperm whales have been found with scars from sucker rings and hooks larger than any confirmed squid species produces. The marks are real. The animal that made them has not been found. Scientists who study sperm whale feeding behaviour have documented dive profiles that take the whales below the maximum confirmed range of the colossal squid, suggesting they pursue prey even deeper than where that species is known to live. Deep ocean acoustic monitoring networks, originally built to track submarine movements during the Cold War, have captured sounds from the deep ocean that cannot be attributed to any known species. Some of these sounds are large-scale, low-frequency, and produced in patterns that suggest biological origin rather than geological activity. The sources have never been identified. The siphonophore photographed in 2020 at 150 feet represented a new record for animal length at the time of its discovery. The footage showed only part of the colony. Scientists examining the spiral structure estimated total length from the visible curvature. A different siphonophore colony in a different location, growing in optimal conditions over a longer time, could exceed that record by a significant margin. The deep ocean is not a place where biology stabilizes into known quantities. Every expedition changes what science considers possible. The record for the longest animal has been broken multiple times in the past 20 years. The record for the deepest confirmed large animal has been broken multiple times. The record for the oldest confirmed vertebrate has been broken. Each break revealed not an outlier, but a representative of conditions operating far beyond what previous sampling had captured. What comes next from the deep is genuinely unknown, and the final chapter of this story sits with that question, looking not just at what the ocean has hidden, but at what the existence of these giants says about life itself. Stand at the edge of the ocean, look at the surface. Nothing in what you can see gives any indication of what exists a few miles straight down. A blue whale is visible, a dolphin is visible, a school of tuna catching the light is visible. The surface is active, dramatic, and observable. Below it, in the cold dark, something equally dramatic has been running for hundreds of millions of years, entirely out of sight, entirely outside the framework of biology that most humans think they understand. The giants of the deep ocean exist because life is more flexible than intuition suggests. Every principle that seems to set a limit on how large or how long-lived or how strange an animal can be turns out to be a principle specific to certain conditions. Change the conditions and the limits shift. The deep ocean changed enough conditions simultaneously that the limits shifted so far they became almost unrecognizable. Temperature, pressure, oxygen, light, predation, food scarcity. These are not just physical parameters. They are the inputs that natural selection reads to decide which body plans survive and which do not. The deep ocean feeds those inputs into the selection process in a combination found nowhere else on Earth, and the output is a catalogue of life that challenges every assumption built from surface experience. The giant squid waited 2 centuries before science acknowledged it. The colossal squid remained essentially unknown for decades after its formal description. The Greenland shark was assumed to live a normal shark lifespan until a team thought to check its eye lenses. The megamouth went undiscovered until a Navy anchor tangled with one by accident. The siphonophore's full length was measured for the first time in 2020. Each of these animals represents a gap between what science assumed and what reality contained. The gap closes a little with each expedition, each new camera lowered into the dark, each net pulled up from depth. But the gap remains enormous. The 80% of the seafloor never closely observed still holds whatever it holds, and the history of deep ocean discovery gives no reason to expect that history to be modest. The giants also reveal something about the relationship between environment and life that extends beyond the ocean. Any environment that applies consistent selective pressure over enough time will produce biology optimized for that pressure. The deep ocean is cold, dark, and scarce, and it produced giants built for cold, darkness, and scarcity. An environment with different consistent pressures will produce different biology, just as consistently. This is why the discovery of hydrothermal vent ecosystems in 1977 was philosophically important beyond its immediate biological findings. Life existed in a place where no life should exist, running on energy from chemical reactions instead of sunlight, producing ecosystems of unusual animals around volcanic activity. The finding expanded the definition of where life was possible. That expanded definition now informs the search for life beyond Earth. If life can run on volcanic chemistry in total darkness, at extreme pressure miles below the ocean surface, then the range of environments elsewhere in the solar system where life might exist grows considerably. The ice-covered oceans of Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, and Enceladus, one of Saturn's moons, both likely contain liquid water kept warm by tidal heating from their parent planets. If hydrothermal activity occurs on their floors, the chemistry that feeds tube worms in the Pacific might feed something in those oceans too. The giants of the deep ocean are a reminder that life finds a way to fill almost any set of conditions with something adapted to those conditions. The deep ocean is cold, dark, and crushing. It is full of creatures that look like they were designed for another planet. They were designed for this one by the same forces that shaped everything alive on Earth, just applied in a different direction and over an incomprehensible amount of time. The ocean floor is still mostly dark, still mostly unknown, still running the same experiment it has been running for hundreds of millions of years. The results keep arriving, one expedition at a time, each one stranger than the last.